everyone. Today is February 15, 2022. Thank you all for joining our extended day ahead market working group 3 for greenhouse gas accounting and cost. I will be helping facilitate this meeting. My name is Brenda Corona and from the Stakeholder Engagement Group here at the California ISO. I'm also accompanied here with Kevin Head as well as Brian Jacobson. We will be helping assist with this meeting as well. A little reminder for the meeting candidates is that it's going to be resuming back to Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 3 p.m. For today's agenda, we are going to go over a few topics, and we'll be inviting Abhijit Singh to participate in speaking about the Carb presentation, as well as a Q&A session to follow. I do have a few meeting reminders for this meeting. Is going to be recorded and posted under the Stakeholder Initiatives page. And then also these files are publicly available on the stakeholder page, and any of this related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And so for these calls are structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives and keep comments brief, professional, and respectful. Also, if you'd like to participate and ask a question, make sure you use the virtual raise a hand icon above your chat window in order for us to know that you would like to speak. As well, for those who are only in the audio only session, please press #2 on your device in order for us to unmute you as well. Then lastly, if you do have any technical assistance needed, please feel free to send us a private chat and we will be able to assist you. Also remember that when you do speak, please state your name and affiliation first before making a comment, and also feel free to send a chat to all panelists. With that, that's my introduction. I'll go ahead and invite Kevin Head to go ahead and follow the next few topics. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks, Brenda. So welcome everybody to Working Group 3. As Brenda said, we will be moving back to the twice a week meeting schedule, so Tuesdays and Thursdays. We are not going to change around the schedule for next week because of President's Day, if anybody has it off. We'll keep just the normal Tuesday, Thursday cadence. Thanks to everybody who submitted their homework assignments last week. They were due on the 10th, but it's not too late if you want to submit any additional questions that you might have. We're planning on going over those on Thursday as a group, so more to come on that. But if you want to add any, or if you missed the deadline, feel free. It's okay if you submit it late. Today's presentation, I'd like to, I think we have two goals. First is to hear Carb's presentation on their cap and trade program and the reporting requirements for the electricity sector. And second, we are going to revisit the topic of West-wide greenhouse gas accounting and try to seek resolution on that issue. So with that, I will introduce Abhij Singh. Abhij, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand so the operator can identify you. And as a reminder to any of Abhij's colleagues who might want to weigh in as subject matter experts, please, Abhij, when you're introducing them, just say their full name and ask them to raise their hand, and the operator can find them that way. So for the broader group, Carb's asked that they have time to run through their entire slide deck first, and then we'll open it up for Q&A afterwards. Depending on how the discussion's going, I expect to try to finish up the Q&A by 2 o'clock, 2:10, and then we'll move on to that second topic. So with that, Abhij, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand so we can call on you, and we will get started.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have the raise hand feature, but I've been unmuted.
I'm having trouble hearing you. It's a little quiet.
Is it? Sorry. Sorry, I tested this out earlier and it seemed to be working fine. Is that any better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. I'll try and speak up a bit. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Singh. I am the Electric Power Entity Specialist with the Mandatory Reporting Regulations Verification section at the California Air Resources Board. I am joined in this call by my colleague and counterpart Tess McDermott in the reporting section and Rachel Gold in the Cap and Trade program. I also have several other CARB colleagues on the call who will be helping me answer questions towards the end. As Kevin mentioned, I will be giving this presentation through all the way through, so please leave questions until the end. In this presentation, we'll be covering both some topics about both MRR and cap and trade. So MRR is the mandatory reporting regulation and cap and trade. And for those of you who are not familiar, MRR is the program under which we collect all of our data, and then that reported data goes to cap and trade to conduct their market program. And our data also goes to the statewide GHG inventory. Next slide, please.
Hey, Brenda, we have a second document that's a PDF file. I can, if you want to give me presenting rights, I can present my screen if that's easier. Okay, yeah. Hey, Michelle, can you give me presentation rights? Okay, cool. Sorry, everybody, we're working on it here. I can't share my screen. Brenda, would you mind stopping your screen from being shared?
Kevin, let me move it to the other one. I see you have two logins here. I moved it to Kevin Head Presenter. Is that better?
Yes, that's right. Okay. Okay, thanks everybody, and sorry about that, Abaj.
That's quite all right.
All right.
Okay, great. So let's start with the foundational background of our programs. AB 32 and its update SB 32 are the implementing legislations and statutes for both MRR and cap and trade. The AB 32 set the GHG emissions limit to 1990 levels by 2020, and then SB 32 set the GHG emissions limit to 40% below 1990 levels by the end of this decade, 2030. So that is the goal that we are currently on. We did achieve our 2020 goal 4 years ahead of time in 2016. We also have an executive order that requires carbon neutrality by 2045. In addition to our emissions goals, AB 32 also required CARB to account for all GHG emissions from the generation of electricity delivered to and consumed in California, whether the electricity is generated in-state or imported. In addition, AB 32 also requires CARB to minimize the potential for emissions leakage and ensure no resource shuffling is occurring. We will be covering resource shuffling and leakage in a subsequent slide. Next slide, please, Kevin. So how does MRR account for electricity emissions? Under AB 32, GHGs are reported pursuant to MRR, and MRR covers California power plants which must report facility level emissions, and that's under subpart C and D. But what's relevant to this, our conversation today, is that electricity importers must also report imports based on physical delivery of electricity by source. Imported electricity can be either specified or unspecified, and we will address specified and unspecified in a subsequent slide as well. Under MRR, renewable, hydro, and nuclear energy is generally assigned a zero emissions factor. Emissions data reports are subject to annual third-party verification requirements under MRR, so that it's not just self-reported. And MRR emissions data does, as I mentioned before, feed into the California statewide GHG inventory. One thing to note is that MRR reporting is a source-based accounting and is consistent with IPCC, or the International Panel on Climate Change, methods, and designed to specifically avoid double counting. Next slide, please. So an important concept to understand for MRR reporting is that of the first jurisdictional deliverer of electricity. In the cap and trade program, electricity importers are the first responsible party for placing power into the California grid and are responsible for reporting imports into California and for any corresponding compliance obligations. The first jurisdictional deliverer approach was developed as part of the Western Climate Initiative that informed the approach CARB adopted in the program. The Department of Justice was also very involved in the drafting of this piece of regulation. This approach addresses the interconnected nature of the WEC, the potential for emissions leakage and maintains a consistent carbon price signal for all electricity used to serve California. It also ensures consistent treatment of in-state generators and importers and reflects practical, administrative, and regulatory constraints, including federal authority over interstate commerce generally and transmission of electricity specifically. California's approach to covering imported electricity is focused on conforming with the federal authority over interstate commerce, also known as the Commerce Clause. The FGAD approach for emissions accounting was included in the design recommendations for the Western Climate Initiative for imported electricity way back in 2008. In light of stakeholder questions in past workshops that implied that GHG policy at the state level would change as a result of EDAM market design, Carb would like to clarify that our understanding is that this EDAM effort is not seeking to reshape GHG accounting or reduction policy objectives at the state or federal level, or to change state or federal laws. Instead, we understand this effort is to ensure accurate accounting of GHG emission costs incurred by sellers of power, reflect those costs in the least cost dispatch, and to the extent possible, facilitate any required GHG reporting by market participants. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about imported electricity. The MRR requires that imports must be reported as specified when they have a proof of direct delivery and a written contract for ownership stake. Proof of direct delivery includes, and is most commonly, e-tags, showing power originating from a specified facility or near the source. A written power contract must include proof of specified sale along each link in the ownership chain, or whole or partial ownership of the facility. The specified source emissions rate is based on the prior year and is the CO2 equivalent emissions of the resource divided by the net generation of the resource. CARB does not regulate these out-of-state resources, so we utilize federal data from the US EPA and EIA. The default factor was developed through the WCI process and reflects the average emissions rate of resources in the WEC capable of generating additional electricity in response to marginal increases in demand. So this is a point that we would like to emphasize, that the default emissions factor is not an average of California's energy portfolio, but is rather a calculation of the emissions associated with the marginal production of power, and is similar to that of a natural gas plant. CARB reviewed this factor recently and found the marginal generation resources in the WEC remain broadly similar. Next slide, please. So let's talk a bit about emissions leakage and resource shuffling. So a critical aspect of California's approach to covering GHG emissions from electricity imports is how we address emissions leakage. As required by AB 32, CARB designed cap and trade to minimize the potential for emissions leakage. Emissions leakage is a decrease in GHG emissions in California that has a corresponding increase in out-of-state GHG emissions as a result of the program. Resource shuffling is a plan to substitute lower GHG emission power for higher GHG emissions power in order to reduce a compliance obligation for GHG emissions from imported electricity in the program. So to summarize, resource shuffling is a type of emissions leakage. Not all emissions leakage is resource shuffling, and CARB has strict prohibitions against resource shuffling, which have been in place since the onset of the program. Safe harbor provisions exist for compliance with the Renewable Portfolio Standard, Emissions Performance Standard, Short-Term Dispatch in California Independent System Operator or CAISO markets, and grid reliability requirements, among others. CARB actively monitors and enforces the prohibitions on resource shuffling and the requirements for reporting electricity emissions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how do we account for emissions leakage? So emissions leakage was revised most recently in 2019 as part of the 2018 MRR rulemaking. But a form of outstanding emissions accounting for EIM was first implemented in the 2016 rulemaking. The current requirements are placed on California utilities that receive freely allocated allowances and purchase EIM energy to serve California load. We refer to these entities as EIM purchasers. This solution was designed in coordination with CAISO. We'd like to add that out-of-state EIM load and generation do not incur any obligation for EIM outstanding emissions. EIM purchasers collectively address EIM outstanding emissions through the direct retirement of a portion of their freely allocated allowances. Outstanding emissions are apportioned to EIM purchasers based on their share of retail sales, and this ensures the environmental integrity of the cap and trade program. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some of California's programs. We have quite a few complementary programs, two of which are the Renewable Portfolio Standard and the Power Source Disclosure. However, we recognize not everyone understands how they work together. This slide attempts to ensure this point is clear from California's perspective. These programs seek to support market transportation and transparency of California's energy mix and are not GHG accounting programs. So one of the questions we have is, does the reporting of emissions in MRR constitute a claim on the environmental attributes of a REC that would require the retirement of the REC? No. The legal definition of a California REC states that environmental attributes only concern avoided emissions. In a capped program, which is based on source-based accounting, no emissions are avoided by creation of renewable energy. RECs do not confer an avoided emissions value under the cap and trade program, as total GHG emissions allowed under the cap are fixed. The generation of renewables, instead of fossil fuel-based electricity market allowances available that can be used by the generation of renewables instead of fossil fuel-based electricity makes allowances available that can be used by other entities. Entities that import electricity into California must report the electricity based on the emissions profile of the generation facility, irrespective of whether the imported electricity is associated with RECs. Other states and voluntary programs may have different requirements and definitions. To reiterate, RECs are reported in MRR but are not the basis for verification or compliance requirements. These different programs exist today with carbon pricing and are not in conflict. Next slide, please. Since there's been some discussion for how we calculate our imported emissions, we are providing these equations for your reference. I'm not going to speak very much to this, but please let us know if you have any questions. Next slide, please. So given questions from the EDAM workshop on February 1st, 2022, there appears to be some interest in how proceeds from the California Cap and Trade program are currently distributed and for what purposes, as well as what is required for linkage, which in the context of cap and trade programs has a very specific legal meaning. We'll briefly discuss those 2 points to help clear up any confusion as to how these two elements of California's carbon market work. Next slide, please. Thank you. So auction proceeds, which result from the sale of state-owned allowances at auction, are deposited into the state's greenhouse gas reduction fund and are then redistributed throughout the California economy through the state's budget process. These California climate investments are a statewide initiative that puts cap and trade auction proceeds to work, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment. To date, cap and trade auction proceeds have provided for over $18 billion to the investment fund, with over 50% of the investments made benefiting disadvantaged and low-income communities. Investment funds are generally directed towards reducing demand for fossil energy and work in tandem with other policies in CARB's climate portfolio. For example, funds have helped provide rebates for over 400,000 zero-emission and plug-in hybrid vehicles and preserved 660,000 acres of land. Next slide, please. Thank you. In order to address several stakeholder questions, CARB would like to clarify what linkage is in the context of our cap and trade program. California has been linked with Quebec since 2014. We were linked with Ontario for a short time in 2018. Each of these linkages underwent the process described on this slide. Any future linkage will go through the same process. It is important to note here that since linkages relate to ongoing existing markets, CARB must address linkage questions specifically through a public rulemaking process if or when a linkage with another government's program is pursued. We are not currently assessing potential linkage with other programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here are some additional links for your edification. I would like to add one more thing. Cap and trade is a market-based mechanism, and as with any good market, is dependent on the clear and accurate dissemination of information. If at any time anyone has any questions or needs any clarification about any of CARB's programs and how they are set up, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to provide you with any amount of detailed information that you need. So thank you, and that concludes our presentation. We will now take any questions you may have. If Brenda, the facilitators, can please unmute Rachel Gold so that she may assist me in answering that questions, that will be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Abaj. Let me just take a look to see if, all right, cool. Do we have any hands in the queue right now? I'm not seeing it.
Yes, I've unmuted Rachel Gold.
Okay, great. Rachel, we'll just make sure that you're available to answer questions, so please leave your hand up. I do see a hand up from Mary Winky. So Mary, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thanks. This is Mary Winky with the Public Generating Pool. I actually have two questions, if I can take that time. The first one has to do with, I think it was maybe a second or third slide where you talked about not making changes to California's policies. And I just wanted to have an understanding of whether or not, I guess my sort of operating assumption in the context of this workshop has been that the policies won't change, but that the regulations might in terms of the mechanics of them, so long as policy objectives continue to be met, to the satisfactory of California and ARB. But I'm just kind of curious if you're looking at it in the same way, or if you kind of clarify as to whether this extends to kind of the actual rules and how they apply to, say, EDAM imports versus imports in the bilateral market. I think it was actually a different slide than this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Or maybe it was.
I think she just ad-libbed, if I'm not mistaken. But
oh, okay.
Abaj or Rachel, do you guys have a response to that, or do you want to take that back internally?
No, I'm trying to unmute myself. I might have been double muted. Can you hear me now? This is
I can, yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks for that question, Mary. And, we're broadly on the same page about, there may be necessary changes to incorporate what is needed for EDAM, but but our policies and programs and, implementing statutes and the ways those are designed in a broad sense, those are the same. I hope that helps.
Okay. Yep, that answers my question. Thank you. The other question I have relates to, I think the question about linkage, and, again, kind of in the solution that kind of the zonal solution that I've been working on with some other folks is looking at kind of whether or not we can do it, whether or not there needs to be 2 zones or 3 zones, basically, one for Washington, one for California, and one for everybody else. And the conclusion, or the initial conclusion that we've come to, is that there may need to be some kind of common elements across the zones in order to make a market solution work. But that wouldn't necessarily require sort of full program linkage in the way that it was defined here by Abaj, like the fungibility of the allowances, but just some common elements that are agreed to. And I'm curious if that, from CARB's perspective, is an avenue worth pursuing, and I totally understand that it depends on what the elements are, in terms of whether or not that program integrity is maintained. But I'm just curious as to whether or not a pathway that is is an agreement on certain elements, but not full linkage, is a pathway that we should even sort of pursue as a possibility.
Oh, Mary, thank you so much for that question. Operator, could you unmute Jason Gray? I think he can help respond to this question.
Thanks. I see Jason has his hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks. This is Jason Gray. I head up the Cap and Trade program here at Carb. Mary, thanks for the question. I think we're interested to see what your ideas are in terms of how this can work with EDAM. I think on our end, for us, linkage really has this specific legal meaning, and we really can't say more. Cannot say more until we're actually in a rulemaking posture to assess a linkage, which we're not assessing any right now. I think this slide lays out the statutory requirements for how California looks at for carbon market linkage, including program stringency and equivalency on different measures. And I think you're familiar, but other folks can look at as well our linkage documents with Quebec and Ontario for how we've assessed those programs and their elements. So I don't fully know how to answer your question because it sounds like there's maybe a different context for how you're thinking about it in terms of EDAM, but this is the CARB context of this slide.
Thank you, Jason. Mary, do you have any follow-ups, or would you like to?
No, I think that's helpful. I think that's helpful. I think we just need to think about whether or not I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to sort of, how we sort of get an answer to the question of whether or not we need 3 zones. And I think we need to further flesh out the proposal that we have and probably put it in the context of, or attempt to put it in the context of these regulations. But my sort of operating assumption, at least at this point, is that there's not, Washington and California are not going to link within the time frame that we probably need them to, kind of fully link within the time frame that we need them to for EDAM. And so I'm just kind of thinking through what avenues there are to pursue a two-zone approach without full linkage. So I think it's helpful, but it doesn't really fit directly in kind of this linkage regulation. So it might just need some more fleshing out of the concepts. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And maybe Jason, Rachel, and Abaj, if you wouldn't mind me following up on that, just from a timing perspective, the rulemaking process and the sort of preparation that needs to be done beforehand, and then sort of making that effective, does that take longer than a year and 12 months? Well, 2 years. I mean, knowing that one's not started now, it seems that it would not be able to be completed by the end of 2024, but I don't have a sense of CARB's rulemaking timeframes. And
yeah, I think
answer that, but
yeah, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Great. I mean, I think it depends on what the rulemaking is, but just generally our process is you'll typically hold kind of similar workshops to you're all holding now, so informal workshops to work through whatever issues we're looking to bring forward, followed by essentially a year of formal process through public notice and comment and how that works. But it really depends on what the rulemaking is, and I can't today say here's potential timing on any particular changes because I don't have those changes on top of head.
Yeah, thanks. And then after that formal rulemaking process, there's some time that's needed to be taken on CARB's side to implement the rules that were made. Is that correct? Or at the end of the rulemaking process, is everything ready to go and up and running?
Again, it really depends on what the specific rulemaking changes are. So, I mean, if you're trying to drive at, are we going to do a linkage? I can't answer that. I think it really depends on what the changes are. Maybe I'm not understanding the question.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, so I'll move on in the list to Dan Williams was the first person I saw raise his hand after Mary. So Dan, if you could introduce yourself and ask your question to Abaj and team.
Hey, Kevin, thanks. Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. So I think this is adjacent to the presentation, but I'm hoping it maybe is a little bit useful for this and some of the other working groups. And that's just a question around kind of the timing again on the different types of RPS eligible imports that are coming in around the like PCC 1, 2, 3 type of transactions, and just if they could give us a quick update on kind of what's changing over the horizon of the potential EDAM go live and implementation that may sort of impact the types of transactions that are likely to persist sort of outside of EDAM as source specific imports that we have to try and kind of figure out how to fit the market around. And I think it was Doug Howe's question maybe last week in a transmission work group, or maybe it was this one that kind of reminded me of that.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're asking them what changes they might expect to see in the RPS program in the foreseeable future in like 2 to 3 years. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think there's a decline. I'm just not remembering the exact numbers for the sort of declining amounts that can come in under the different buckets and how that may then impact how load serving entities inside California are contracting with external entities, and sort of the volume that then may still be there sort of outside of EDAM to try and work around.
Hi, this is Rachel Gould from the Cap and Trade program. I can attempt to answer this question, which is that those RPS percentages do increase over time up to 60% to 2030. I would have to go back, I'm not an RPS expert, and I would have to go back and check with our colleagues who are responsible for those programs for the exact percentages of the different portfolio content categories. But we'd be happy to follow up with you on that.
Yeah, thanks. Or just even sending over to Kevin, maybe if there's some presentations or a couple documents or something that we could have available in this working group might be helpful. So, it's kind of a lot to just talk through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, thanks, Dan. So next hand I see is Claire. Claire, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and proceed to ask your question?
Thanks, Kevin. This is Claire Bridnich with the Western Power Trading Forum. And I wanted to follow up actually on Mary's question, because I think that was actually quite important. And Jason, I completely take your point that it's hard to know what rulemaking would look like or when it could happen until we know what we're dealing with coming out of the EDAM design. But it does strike me that we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because on the one hand, if we go down one path, and I know you're talking to the CAISO staff, but if we go down one path and then it turns out that you guys are very unhappy with the design, we're back to square one. So I wondered, given that all of us are thinking very hard about this, and the CAISO is going to hopefully be in a position next month to start getting its head around a proposal or options, would it be feasible for the Air Resources Board to have an informal meeting? I know you've got your scope and plan process coming up, but maybe it might be possible in the next couple of months to have some sort of informal meeting so we could have a bit more of a discussion among all the stakeholders and ARB staff in terms of, what we're thinking about in terms of what sort of elements might need to change in the regulations to accommodate one or the other approaches. Is that something possibly doable?
Hey, Claire, this is Rachel. We're always happy to discuss and meet with you all. If you want to send us a request, we could certainly set something up on specific proposals. I think once we have more details, we'd be able to sort of talk through that better. That will be an important thing for us to be able to wrap our heads around a little bit more once that's fleshed out.
Hey, great. Thanks, Rachel. How would, I saw that at the end of this presentation, there was some links. How would folks get in touch with you? Is that information in this?
Yeah, we can, we'll put some contact information in the chat right now.
Thank you. Okay. Folks, I'm not seeing any hands raised. I know that some people had questions that were submitted in the homework assignment that they were interested in hearing from Carb on. I'm wondering if any of those folks would like to use this opportunity to ask Carb directly, because as they mentioned, we will not be answering Carb technical questions on their behalf because we're not in a place to do so. So this is your opportunity to ask Carb questions about their program in a forum where we might all benefit from both hearing the question and the answer. So we had scheduled a significant amount more of Q&A time here. So if we want to let Carb go on with their day, we're welcome to do so. But this is really the chance that you have to ask Carb about their program. So I'd encourage you to avail yourselves of it. I see that Mary raised her hand again. Thanks, Mary. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure, I will ask more questions since no one else is raising their hand. I think what I'm really curious in understanding in a little bit more detail, if possible, is the lens through which Carb will review the integrity of a particular proposal. And I'm wondering if you can get into, I mean, I know you kind of specified already the broad picture of the policy objectives, but I'm wondering if you could go a little bit deeper than that, and kind of and talk a little bit specifically about sort of how you will look at this, any proposal. And, I'll just give you an example of, the zonal approach that we're looking at, for instance, quantifies, again, when we kind of flesh it all out, the concept is it will quantify emissions associated with imports, and will price emissions where those imports, in the footprint, will price imports where inside the zone where appropriate, but it won't necessarily identify the importer as is currently done in the bilateral market and the EIM. So I just and kind of the way I'm sort of thinking about it is well, you're still achieving the same objectives even though you're not identifying the importer. So I'm just kind of curious with things like that, what will sort of what are the policy objectives that you're really focusing in on when you're reviewing any proposals that come out of this effort? And I'm not necessarily asking a question specific to this, like, do you need to identify an importer or not? I know you probably can't answer that right off the cuff, but that's just an example of sort of like, how would you sort of look at something like that and whether or not it's something that is acceptable?
Hey, Claire, thanks for that question. I'm not sure that in the moment we can really give you a fleshed out answer without sort of understanding more about the specifics of these proposals. As Abaj presented and shared our perspective is always from the policy objectives of our programs, and that's how we're going to look and assess these proposals. And I don't know if there are others on our team who have more and want to weigh in on this one.
And just a reminder, if anybody from Carb wants to speak, you should be unmuted, but if not, please raise your hand so the operator can identify themselves, or identify you, rather.
Ken Knowles, your line is unmuted. You may go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
This is Ken Knoll from Charlotte Irrigation District. Hey, Rachel and Abaj. I just want to, again, it's early in the process here, but I want to make sure we're not forgetting about the RPS adjustment. And I don't know, I know it's a complicated subject, but it is where you do crossover and you get RECs representing greenhouse gases. And I'm just curious if you want to go down that path or not.
Ken, sorry, just for my benefit, would you mind repeating your question one more time, just so I understand where you're going?
It's a little complicated because the ARB doesn't necessarily like to talk about the RPS adjustment, but for entities or utilities that have grandfathered resources, you have to, if you're firming and shaping them, for instance, from a wind farm, you have to retire the RECs for the firm and shape, the piece that you're bringing home at a different temporal time, and you have to retire RECs that are associated to get the greenhouse gas credit for that. And I'm just wondering if this is something that even needs to be brought up, but not knowing how we're going to deal with the EDAM and the EIM on this subject. I'm wondering if ARB has thought this through, or if anyone else has.
Hi, Ken. Thank you for that question. Ryan Showland from our team is happy to speak to that. I believe he has his, or will have his hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi all, this is Ryan Shawland. I'm the manager of the verification program for the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions at CARB. So yeah, thanks for that question and clarification, Ken. So for those, especially those among the working group here who report to CARB, that might be a source of confusion relative to Abaj's slides that make it clear that the REC itself doesn't have the avoided emissions value in a source-based accounting program and in a cap and trade system in CARB. We do kind of have a bit of a curveball there that Ken's referring to, and that's referred to as an RPS adjustment. And what that is a recognition of the compliance cost for reporting entities who report to CARB, who also have to comply with the renewable portfolio standard in California. And so for a portion of the electricity, the renewable electricity that receives credit under the renewable portfolio standard, those entities, those load serving entities, don't have to have that power directly delivered to California. They can pair RECs with firmed and shaped power that comes into California. So they won't have evidence of direct delivery to California. And so it doesn't get a zero emission factor for the megawatt hours that are directly delivered to California. Generally, that's unspecified power that comes in at our unspecified source emissions factor rate. But when we were making the rules, 10 plus years ago now, we recognized that was a cost there was a cost to load serving entities to comply with that requirement of the renewable portfolio standard. So we wanted to recognize that cost. And so we allowed them to report what's known as the renewable portfolio standard adjustment. where if the power is not directly delivered to California, they can show that they retired RECs for purposes of RPS compliance and receive a lower compliance obligation under cap and trade. So we say that that's a recognition of that avoided cost in the form of a reduced compliance obligation, but it's not an adjustment to their actual emissions, since, as Abaj mentioned, it doesn't, we don't recognize the emissions value of that REC. So that's sort of a narrow point. I don't know if it's, totally necessary for folks to understand who don't report directly to California, but it's a good kind of nuance to draw out that, this is a place in our program where we do require the reporting of RECs, but it doesn't change the kind of basic source-based accounting framework that we use.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan, and I hope that answers your question, Ken. I appreciate that, and I was unaware of that, so thanks for bringing it up. That's a good question. I did get a question from Kyle Frankowicz, who I believe is with Pacific Core, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll go ahead and just read that question out loud. And that is, on the complementary program slide, Brenda, if you wouldn't mind going to that slide, I think it's maybe 6 or 7. Yeah, perfect. The question is, sorry, I lost it. On the complementary program slide, I'm getting stuck on the avoided emissions attributes. Could someone walk through that logic again? And sorry, Kyle is with Tacoma Power and not Pacificor. Apologies.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, Kyle. So because in the cap and trade program, we obviously have a cap on emissions. So when renewable electricity is generated, that means that fewer emissions are generated, and that would, in a cap system, that frees up other entities, other covered entities to emit. So in the context of our cap and trade system, there are no avoided emissions from the generation of renewable electricity. I hope that helps. And we further walk through this. There's a link we provided at the end of this slide deck where we explained how this works in the cap and trade program and with our complementary programs like the RPS. And it was the last link, I believe, at the end of the deck. So that might be helpful as well.
Hey, Kevin, this is Jason. Thanks, Rachel. Just a quick clarification on that last link. So that's a joint letter between the California Resources Board, CEC, and the CPUC. So all three agencies kind of weighing in on this approach. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Jason. Kyle also has a related question, which I'll paraphrase, but it's along the same lines, which is maybe not something you guys can answer, and I'd understand that if that were the case. He says, if I understand correctly, RECs used for CETA compliance, that's the Clean Energy Transformation Act in Washington, I believe is what it refers to. RECs used for CETA compliance represent all non-power attributes, which he goes on to define. And then he says, is there a way to reconcile the two frameworks between CARB and Washington? So, I'd recognize if you're not in a position to answer that question, but I thought I'd pass it along.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Kyle. We're not, you intuited correctly, Kevin, we're not in a position to answer that question. Although if you look at the letter that we were just discussing, we do sort of address the way our program works in the context of California's rules and regulations, which may be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I will move on to the next caller. We have Jessica. Jessica, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and please proceed with your question.
Hi there. Yeah, this is Jessica Zana of Pacificor. Can you guys hear me? Great, thanks. Yeah, I was wondering if the ARB could talk about what limitations or advantages it might see if it's thought about it at all in expanding the resource-specific deeming methodology that's currently used in EIM to a larger EDAM or dayhead footprint.
Jessica, thanks so much for that question. At the moment, we are in listening mode and wrapping our heads around the concepts that are being proposed. I think we'll have, we're waiting to see more specifics to really understand the benefits of each of the concepts under discussion.
Thank you, that's helpful. I wonder if you could talk to it at all just in the context of EIM and what exists today. Are you able to sort of bucket what would be your in any areas of concern or areas of where you see that it either functions well or maybe functions short of what you'd like to see?
I don't think we have a specific response unless there's somebody, I don't have a specific response to that right now, unless there's somebody else on our team who'd like to provide perspective on that. We've worked with CAISO and many of you over the years to ensure that our program can be incorporated into what's occurring in the EIM, and we have a current system that Abaj described to address emissions leakage and address our concerns around those in the EIM.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have another question. This one's from Sophie Hayes, and I'll answer or I'll ask the question real quick and just a time check. We've got at least 5 more minutes if you folks are still willing to lend your time. We could go maybe 15 minutes if there's more time, but just letting folks know that we're nearing the end of the Q&A portion here. So this question comes from Sophie Hayes, who's with Western Resource Advocates, and it's also along the line of questioning on avoided emissions. And she says, if RECs do not confer an avoided emissions value, does a lack of a REC confer an emissions value? In other words, is power without a REC unspecified and conferred an emission factor?
I'm going to ask Ryan or Sid to speak to this. I would again recommend this joint letter that we where we explained how this works in our program. Unless Ryan and Sid, either of you have anything you'd like to add.
This is Ryan. No, I would just add that I think Abaj explained on one of the slides a little bit about how if it's a specified source resource, our requirements to get to have the emissions calculated at the emission factor associated with that resource are outlined on that slide. So that's proof of direct delivery. So in most cases, outside of the context of EIM and EDAM, in most cases that's going to be an ETAG. And also a specified source contract. And so if you have those two, you have the promise to deliver and you have the proof that it was delivered, then the emission factor associated with that specified source is what's used to calculate the emissions from that import, without regards to whether you are able to report RECs associated with that or provide proof of retirement of those RECs or anything else associated with the RECs that were generated associated with that particular resource.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, I am not seeing any other hands raised. I got questions in the homework assignment from San Diego and from Bonneville about specific aspects of the CARB program. we're not going to answer those questions on Thursday because we're in as the ISO is not able to answer those questions on CARB's behalf. So if you would like those questions to be answered, please raise them now. Otherwise, we'll have to skip them on Thursday. So I'll give folks one last chance to ask their questions to CARB. And if we don't have any more, we can thank them all for participating. And
yeah, thank you, Kevin. I just wanted to follow up on that. If folks do have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to assist you with those.
yeah, thanks. Okay, we do have one last question. It's from Vijay. Would you go ahead, Vijay?
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation from CARB. I joined a bit late, but I caught up. If you were queen or king of the day, or the entire CARB team had a choice to help be part of a larger system, and you had to track imports and exports, what would be the one big change or wish list item you would have for the other states and other entities interacting with California? I'm not changing your job, I'm not changing your role, but I'm asking for a West-wide consistency of greenhouse gas emission accounting. What kind of procedural or policy or process change would you like to see? Thank you.
Vijay, thanks for that big question. I will say I'm not sure that we have a response at the moment. We're looking at this from California's overall policy objectives, which include, addressing climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in California and more broadly. So that's the perspective we come to this with. I will leave it at that for the moment.
I thought that was a great answer. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, well, I will, on behalf of at least the working group, thank you all very much for giving your time and your expertise to help us understand all these complicated issues. And I recognize that we might continue to interact over the process, but this was a really great presentation that we had today. And I'd like to thank everybody from CARB who took the time out to talk, and we look forward to continuing on this process with you. So thanks very much. So
thanks, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, we'll switch back over to me. Cool. So the next section we have coming on here is a recap of WRA's proposal that we had discussed last week on Tuesday. And I want to try to maybe not summarize the WRA proposal, but put it in the context of this working group and try to come up with how we as a working group want to take on this proposal and interact with it. So I'll go ahead and read a couple of slides that I have here, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So WRA, as a reminder, proposed sort of a new West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system that would expand REGIS or REGIS-like entities REC program to cover not only renewable energy generation, but non-emitting and emitting resources that are non-renewable. And the idea behind this is that this system could be leveraged by state regulators in the administration of their RPS and clean energy and greenhouse gas compliance programs. A few things that jumped out at me during the presentation would be that this system would require an entity to develop and operate a system that attributes generation to load. So that's the role that's currently served by ETAGs today in bilateral markets, but we need to figure out some way of applying it more generally across the West. Next would be that there would have to be a methodology created for making these generation tracking certificates that not only tracks the megawatt hours of the energy, but the other associated attributes, in particular greenhouse gases, and renewable characteristics of that generation. And then third, because I think it's reasonable to assume that the ISO's EIM, Western EIM, and the EDAM won't cover the entire West. So on January 1st, 2024, so if that were the case, then how would data requirements be sort of standardized across the Western United States? That's something that would have to be agreed upon by multiple entities and ultimately implemented by them. So the next slide has, what I consider to be our working group role here. Most of these activities are really outside of the ISO's control in terms of what state policymakers and regulators need to do to react to this tracking program. And it's also outside of our traditional historic market operator role at the California ISO. And so just with that in mind, I think we need to figure out as a working group, do we want the ISO to build and operate this system? And if not, do we want the extended day ahead market or the EIM or both to provide data to such a program once it's developed? And then third, if we do decide to provide that data, do we want to build those reporting requirements into the market optimization design? And so in thinking that through on the next slide, so let me put a little bit more context here. So the question of how could the EDAM greenhouse gas market optimization design effort that we're undergoing here be impacted by these data reporting requirements? So, for example, if such a system were built, it might require resource-specific attribution of generation to load, which might be incompatible with the unspecified approach because, as we were discussing earlier, it doesn't directly attribute resource-specific attribution to load. So, we'd have to think that through in terms of the market optimization design, and it might even preclude us pursuing a particular approach. We still have yet to see how that could work. Further, this West-wide greenhouse gas tracking system might not be completed by January 24th, which is January 2024, which is when the extended day ahead market is expected to go live. So how do we deal with a system that's still sort of in progress of being built? So these are ways that it might constrain how we design the market optimization for greenhouse gases in the extended day ahead market and potentially the energy imbalance market too. And even if that constraint isn't imposed, it definitely adds an extra layer of complexity onto what I think we can all kind of agree here is an already complicated topic. So the next slide, I've laid out 4 different options for how we might consider proceeding here. And I'm not saying that these are the only 4 options, but I thought putting a little structure around the conversation might be useful in helping us think through the questions at hand. So I'll run through these 4 options. The first one is a fully integrated system where the ISO buys off on integrating itself completely with the greenhouse gas reporting system and builds and operates that system on behalf of a different third party. And so what that would mean is that we would have to, as a working group, come up with a policy for designing that system and how we would go about operating it in perpetuity effectively. And what that requires, obviously, the ISO to buy off on building and operating the system. We as the working group would have to develop that policy. And then the various state regulators and policymakers would have to buy off on participating in that program. Otherwise, if they're not going to take it on, then we've put a lot of effort into something that's not going to be used. And then finally, Regis or Regis-like entity, well, in this case, Regis itself would have to buy off on the REC aspects of it because currently they run the REC tracking program in the West. The second option here would be the EDAM market design is independent from this greenhouse gas reporting system. So the ISO doesn't run it. We don't administer the program. We're not verifying the recs, those types of things. But that program uses the data from the market. So the output of the market is the input into this greenhouse gas reporting system. And the second aspect that's important here is we would have to make sure that the output from the EDAM market fits in well with the inputs required by this reporting system. So because of that connection there, we would be constrained in how we build our market design to make sure that the output from that design could fit into this hypothetical West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system. And so the ISO would have to make sure that they're on board with reporting the appropriate data. We as a working group would have to come up with what data we would be reporting out and whether or not our market design could accommodate that data, those data requirements. And then obviously state regulators and policymakers would have to buy off on participating in that program. And we'd have to work with Regis, as we discussed a little bit last week, on what data requirements are needed to come out of the market to fit into, say, when I say Regis, I mean Regis or a Regis-like entity. I don't want to sign Regis up for anything, but if we were to have this connection between the two, we'd have to cooperate with Regis or a Regis-like entity to make sure that the data requirements are fixed. The third option is just a little bit less extensive with that, which is, again, the market design is independent from the West-wide greenhouse gas tracking system, but we don't constrain how we develop our market design by what data requirements are needed as an input into that system. So we say, basically, to the extent possible, we can provide data to Regis or Regis-like entity to use our data to the extent that it's useful for them. But we don't change our policy development process to fit in with this program. And then the fourth option would be we just assume or forget about the idea of a West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system and just proceed on our market design efforts as they are written currently. So what I was hoping to do is I've laid out these options. If anybody has any thoughts about these or wants to weigh in, I recommend that you raise your hand now so we can talk it through. If you have any alternatives or option 2.5 or something along those lines, I think we're all ears on that as well. So I want to open the call up for some Q&A here. And I see a number of people joining the queue here. So I will call on, let's see, the first hand that I saw raised was Bonnie Blair. Bonnie, would you mind go ahead and introducing yourself and weighing in when you can?
This is Bonnie Blair. I represent the Six Cities group, and this working group may not be familiar with that terminology. It's essentially, it's a group of six municipal electric systems in Southern California. It seems to me that we're already, and in my view, inevitably in option 2, whether or not there's a new reporting system design. The folks I represent are subject to greenhouse gas regulations. They have to comply. They're located within the CAISO balancing authority area, so they're captive participants in the CAISO's markets, if you will. They have no option about whether or not they participate in the day-ahead market. And you can't put them, in my view, or you can't appropriately put them between a rock and a hard place by designing an EDAM structure that would not provide the data they need to comply with their greenhouse gas obligations. So whether you set up some whole new accounting system or not, it seems to me that part of the CAISO's job in this process is to make sure that at the end of it, there is a way for people to get the data they need to comply with their greenhouse gas obligations. And I think that's an absolute requirement for folks that are within the CAISO BAA, because they have no choice about whether to be in the day-ahead market or not. And I think if EDAM is going to be attractive to participants outside the CAISO BAA, I think that's going to be a sort of fundamental criterion as well. That, in other words, folks are not going to be disposed to join EDAM if in doing so they undermine their ability to comply with whatever state obligations they have. So, like I said, I think we're in option 2. I don't think there's really, I mean, option 1's an alternative, that CAISO takes it all over and does it. But I think sort of the minimum that has to come out of this is what you describe in option 2.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I wasn't talking about the specific greenhouse gas reporting system that Carb just discussed. I was talking about the West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system that was proposed in last week's meeting, which was a pretty fundamentally new concept and one that we'd have to figure out how to accommodate, extensively if we took it on in this working group. So taking that into consideration, the California utilities that you were mentioning are not required to participate in this new hypothetical West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system. Does that change your response at all?
Well, I guess I wasn't thinking of it so much as being focused on WRA's proposal. I was thinking of it from the perspective of that as one, as one model to which states might decide to move. I mean, there can be other evolution in greenhouse gas programs, obviously, but I think that at a minimum, I think what comes out of this has to include the ability to comply with whatever the obligations are at the time the program is implemented. Okay. And then as they evolve, I don't think it's something that we can just sort of say, well, whatever.
Yeah, I understand. So that program, though, will not likely be implemented by the time that EDAM goes live, or even by the time that the market design has to be finalized by the end of this year or early next year. So if I understood what you were saying correctly, we should design for the policy that we have, not for the policy that we might have in the future, pending a lot of other third-party agreement on it. Would that be characterizing?
Yeah, I agree with that, Kevin. I mean, I think whatever is in place at the time EDAM goes live, it has to accommodate existing requirements. I also think that in thinking about it, it has to be sufficiently flexible that it can adapt to accommodate new changes in greenhouse gas regulation, whether it's a new accounting system or a new greenhouse gas area, whether it's an additional state that says, yeah, we're gonna impose GHG requirements on our utilities. I think that ability to comply from the get-go is one important principle. Another one is, as best we can accomplish it, adaptability to the evolution of new requirements and new approaches.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. That's really good insight, and we appreciate your perspective on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So the next hand I saw up was Alva Svoboda. Alva, do you want to hop in, and then hopefully I can call somebody from the non-California EIM community, but just want to make sure we're getting to.
Sure, I'll be quick. Just to, my view of this sort of accounting system is it's essentially equivalent to the settlement system, and it's essentially post real time. So I think you might want to expand your concept of the options, because it really has to include EIM as well as EDAM. It's I think the way Bonnie cast it is more accurate for this design process, which is that GHG and the anticipation of GHG has to be accurately captured in the market design, and there have been various proposals for that, but the actual accounting has to be done after delivery. And so I think it's, if you're sort of including settlements, you're immediately including more than just the EDAM design there. You're including EIM as well. So that's just my thought on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. It's not something that we've explicitly brought up, but I can't think of a way that we could design an EDAM and have it be fundamentally different than the way that the EIM said differently. I don't think we can design a day-ahead market that doesn't very closely mirror how the EIM, the real-time market, works. So, I think we would make sure that those are aligned to the extent possible. But it sounds like you're saying that after the fact accounting effort would have to be, is that something that would be a constraining factor on how we design the market design, or is it something that can be determined after the fact, or we plug into it as best we can?
Yeah, again, I would kind of be aligned with the way Bonnie cast it, which is that there are constraints, anticipative constraints, but the accounting system is not directly relevant to the design, I don't think. In other words, how you anticipate those costs being allocated, what the obligations are going to be has to be the ISO has to see those costs properly in order to tell whether market participants are representing their costs properly. But the accounting system itself is not essential to the design of the EDAM.
Okay, thanks, Alva. So let's see. And if you guys don't have any more questions, please go ahead and lower your hand. Somebody we haven't heard from today, Stuart Kelly. Do you want to go ahead, Stuart?
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Stuart Kelly, LA. I completely concur with Bonnie in terms of, we've got to think about, compliance from a state obligation and the existing requirements that are in place. I think at a minimum level, I would expect the market to be able to, capture the necessary data and a minimum facilitate reporting. When it comes to constraining and some of the questions we're kind of asking here are around, does ISO do the reporting system or someone else? I think we're too early at this stage to be visiting on that. I think we've got to come back and resolve the allocation. Are we going down a resource specific path, or have we any more progress on a zonal approach and how it would work? I would anticipate some derivative of a resource specific approach that we maybe can consider and potentially maybe further discussions on zonal. But until we crack that particular nut, so to speak, I think it's somewhat difficult to answer some of the questions. It shouldn't be completely constrained, but you should be able to, provide the data, and as Bonnie had said, be able to, comply with the obligations. And I think, and maybe it's just me that's struggling here, but I don't think there's a panacea. When I look at the various states and what's unfolding, I'm thinking that there needs to be, some stepping stone, for EDAM potentially to start, but it's far from the end of the discussion. If any topic ever needed some evolution and various phases, it's probably this particular working group. That's just my general feel, and I'm somewhat concerned that until we make more substantive progress on the allocation, we're constraining this work group and may not come up with even a stepping stone of a deliverable.
Well, yeah. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that you think it's too early to decide because we don't have the more details around the approaches. And just to give the audience a perspective of where we're going, we used the last 2 weeks to confer between the owners of, or the initial offerers of the 2 different approaches. We used that time to go back internally and improve those. And furthermore, we gathered a bunch of questions that you folks had to understand what you wanted to know about those design objectives. And the goal is next week and the following week to have sort of version 2.0 proposals out on the table, so we can continue that evolution conversation. So I'm trying to say that we're exactly where we need to be to address the broader question of reporting. But I'm asking specifically for the proposal that was on the table that's sort of a good end future state of how a West-wide greenhouse gas accounting approach might work. Do we want to try to work around that and plug our market design into that or not? So, Stuart, what do you think on that particular one? I mean, do you still think it's too early, or do you think that we can work around that?
I think we've got to be pragmatic, get back to what Bonnie's statements were. We've got some existing obligations or whatever. If we feel that we're coming up with a design in the 2.0s that really starts to stretch the reporting, I'm sure it'll get flagged. And then might be the right time to say, should we constrain ourselves or not? I don't even know if we'll get that far. I'm really interested to see how the 2.0s evolve. My instinct tells me we're going to fall short of whatever all stakeholders want, and may need to just create a platform for future discussion. So I think it's a little bit too early, and I think it will come out as we discuss the 2.0s. But to completely constrain the discussion right now based on reporting, rather than just say pragmatically it needs to work, I think that's a better way to look at it.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. All right, we have a new name that I'm not familiar with, so I'd like to give this person a chance to speak. I see Tony Braun has your hand up. So Tony, if you wouldn't mind explaining your affiliation and weighing in when you can. And Tony, you might need to unmute yourself again if you're double muted. All right, we're still not hearing it.
Yeah, Tony, your line is unmuted. You probably need to unmute yourself again.
I'm speaking.
Yep.
And got me? Right.
We got you now. Yep.
It was just a time delay.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity here. So, I mean, I have to say that I greatly appreciate the creativity and the ideas that people are bringing to the table here. It seems to me that for the states that are moving in the decarbonization direction, there needs to be a durable solution that addresses some of these hard issues of accounting in a common way across boundaries. At the same time, I am loath to plug in the immediate problem that we have here with respect to how it's factored into the EDAM dispatch. into that broader conversation, because I can see a multi-year process unfolding on that, and I think addressing something in the context of EDAM is hard enough without adding that additional layer. It is definitely not going to be perfect. Whatever we come up with, I think I agree with Stuart and others. I mean, the markets aren't going to solve the state policy issues, concerns, objectives. They're just a tool, and so I think I would vote here in this early stage. We don't want to get plugged into a particular reporting solution, and I think also it's highly related to, but not really directly, the scope, as I see, of the working group, which is trying to solve this issue in the context of the EDAM dispatch.
Okay, thanks, Tony. And would you mind just letting the group know that you're affiliation?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my muted part. Apologize. Tony Braun, our firm represents the California Municipal Utilities Association, Balancing Authority of Northern California, and other public power interests.
Great. Thanks, Tony. That was great input. All right. So for the folks who don't want to ask any further questions, please go ahead and lower your hand. I think we should give Vijay a chance to weigh in here. We've taken some voices from, the various IOUs and EIM entities, but would love to hear from Vijay. So Vijay, would you go ahead?
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for the discussion and openly putting the WRA proposal, for open evaluation in a way. From WRA perspective, and I think I can speak safely for all NGOs, a good business practice of a market product requires reporting. You do that with the EIM. You do that with all other market services and products. Your market monitoring team has reporting as well. So WRA definitely, I can speak for WRA, would like to be in the camp 1 or 2. I have some concern and request to revisit the word constrained in number 2. I think it should be influenced, not constrained. You should be keeping in mind what reporting will come out with once you agree on dispatch rules or optimization rules. So high preference number 2, second preference number 1, because I definitely don't want a battle of the fees for reporting where we're constraining on, that's where constraining comes, is constraining EDAM to integrate fully a reporting system. So these are a couple of comments. I want to share one other thing. I can't speak for Regus, but some of us have met with WEC senior management, and I was given the support that WEC is open-minded to Regus being an option, which is why I put that in our slides. I wouldn't have spoken. I did not speak for Regus. I'm sharing what I understand, that Regus is an option that should not be ignored. And if you have to come up with a market that is working by 2024, having a parallel conversation that the states can work with Regus, is something that should not be ignored, because that's how EDAM would be a solution in the West. And last I checked the EIM entities list, a good proportion of them are outside California. So let's not forget the challenges and needs of EIM entities outside California in having a place where they can access and have a system that brings out the information coming out of the dispatch. So this is not just, no offense, a green liberal hippie NGO request. This is a practicality request to keep that in mind as you move forward. And the last item I will bring up is what George had noted, whether you take scenario 1 or 2 in the WRA proposal for all generation attributes, you do get in an all generation attribute certificate-based concept, new detailed information on resources that can enhance the cost portfolio. It can improve the cost basis for what is used in dispatch and decision making, whether you use hurdle rates or not, whether you use a zonal system that's BA level or LSC level or state level or not. So there is a benefit of what is kept in mind for reporting in terms of what is collected pre-dispatch from the entities. So there is that benefit. You keep it for the end, you're going to have a lot of stirring the hamster later on. So I agree with actually Bonnie and Stuart in one way. you have the practicality to agree on what accounting methodology you want to first work on. But if you put this too much to the far in the end, it's going to be a bigger problem later to address and deal if you want this system to respond to the needs of the future grid. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Vijay. That was some good stuff. I saw Claire had her hand up. She's had it up for a while. So Claire, would you mind going ahead and raising your thoughts?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. I'll keep this very brief. I think you're missing an option. I agree with some of the comments by Stuart and Bonnie, and I can't remember who the other speaker was, that there is a need to talk about greenhouse gas reporting at some point. But the issue I have with options 1, 2, and 3 is they're all tied to this hypothetical West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system. That may be all well and good, but I don't see any need for the CAISO to get involved in a West-wide tracking system. I do, however, think that there is a need, once we've had a discussion in terms of the optimization and can circle back around to this, to think about ways that we could improve the accuracy and reporting of data out of the optimization for, as I said, the regulators and the public. So I think there's actually a 4 bis here, which is, no coordination input to a West-wide greenhouse gas accounting system, but a further discussion closer to the end of our process about how we might improve the greenhouse gas reporting out of the market.
Yeah, and we will have that conversation. That's an integral part of both of the approaches that we have on the table so far. So this is not to try to put the resolution on reporting in general. It's just trying to figure out how we would interact with a West-wide all generation tracking. So duly noted that maybe I should have stated that up front, that this isn't the end of the conversation about reporting, but it is hopefully a chance for us to kind of tackle the all generation tracking system. So thanks, Claire. The last hand, let's see, Kathleen, do you want to go ahead? Kathleen Colbert, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself too, please.
Sure. Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me, Kevin?
I can, yep.
Yeah, thanks for the dialogue, and thanks for the chance to just share a thought on it, which is that I agree with what Claire just said. I think you could interpret what Claire said as maybe being number 3. And the way that I interpret number 3 is the CAISO is providing certain data for its operations. So she's just talking about how at some point we need to talk about how to make that information better that the CAISO is going to make available. But that this group is not constrained by this West-wide greenhouse gas reporting. I think that I personally would throw support behind that idea. And I'll just kind of point us back to, I'm going to point us back to those design objectives that we talked about for a while and say that one of them that I think is really critical is number 6, seeking simple solutions where possible while balancing precision and implementation feasibility to support state policy objectives. Of the options you have listed here, I do think number 3 or some version of that is best aligned with the principles that we outlined. We need to be mindful of what's feasible to implement in this EDAM effort and the timeline that we've set out. And the CAISO is setting up a whole new business structure to do environmental emission tracking and accounting and reporting would require a lot of headcounts, a lot of new skill set, and a lot of software development to set up all that infrastructure. And so this is not a small ask. And so I understand there's been a lot of policy items brought up, and I just wanted to put a practical note on it that I would support us focusing on the design and not constraining us so that we can get to a solution that's implementable. And if future efforts want to talk about other things, then that's on the table. But I don't see a CAISO-supported accounting system as feasible for this effort. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Kathleen. Todd Jones, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and ask a question?
Kevin, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little faint, but yeah, we can hear you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, Todd Jones, Center for Resource Solutions. So Kevin, your slides covered a number of different things, but back on slide 6, you talked about different things that may be required if this system were built. And so for the first two, you talk about an entity, to develop or operate a system that attributes generation to load. I just wanted to clarify, resource-specific attribution in the market attributes generation to state or zonal load. That's part of how the market would potentially affect certificates or RECs. And Regis creates certificates and operates its system, which would track attributes between account holders. The attribution to load in that case is done by the account holders, by the certificate buyers as a result of their procurement of those certificates, not by Regis. And then state programs set their own eligibility and compliance rules to determine attribution to load in compliance with their programs. And they could potentially use this system, and as they do use Regis now, for RPS, and CES and power source disclosure, and potentially, accounting for imported electricity and other programs. It would require cooperation on data. And then on slide 7, I agree that. Go ahead.
On point. So, you're just so I understand. So you're saying that the attribution of generation to load, once a certificate is generated, the REC holder will say, hey, this served this particular load serving entity's area. And then that's when you would retire the REC. It doesn't require a third party to say this generation went to that load serving entity. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. The ownership of the REC or the attributes is used by the LSC. Their ownership and retirement of that REC is used by the LSC to demonstrate, delivery or use of that renewable generation, and they can use that for compliance with programs that require that renewable electricity be used to meet, retail sales. So that's the attribution to load. Right? Does that make sense?
Yep. Go ahead.
So, yeah, on slide 7, I agree that expanding Regis to all generation is generally outside of CAISO's control. I also agree that we're not here to discuss changes to state policy. I think what's relevant to this group is how GHG attribution in EDAM interacts with RECs and Regis, and supports or does not support different state programs, and how tools and information for tracking and verifying the delivery of specified power to state or utility load can be used and harmonized to both avoid double counting and facilitate achievement of regional and state goals. Also, I think this is on slide. Oh no, this is still on slide 7. So you ask, do we want the CAISO to build and operate this system? No, we at least don't want multiple attribute tracking systems or instruments operating in the West. That could lead to bigger problems around double counting. It would be better to expand Regis, the existing system, and expand it to all resources if we're going to do that. Do we want EDAM to provide data to such a program once it's developed? We think EDAM should provide resource-specific attribution data to Regis, so data about renewable generation that's been deemed delivered or attributed to certain zones or states, potentially identifying the RECs associated with that generation in Regis, which would happen after the transaction of the energy in these short-term markets. If there's all generation tracking eventually, then that can be data about all generation attributed to those zones or states as well. You ask if we want EDAM to provide the data. Do we want to build reporting requirements into market optimization? We think that EDAM, again, should report to Regis on the quantity of resource-specific attributions or of renewable energy deemed delivered to certain states or zones. And then on
Okay.
slide 8,
But sorry, on that last point, so if the attribution is not comprehensive, is that an issue? Like currently, the only attribution that the Western Energy Imbalance Market does is attribute energy that's outside of California to California, or more specifically to the California balancing area.
That's the only generation. That's the only attribution that's relevant to Regis and to REX. So no, I don't think that's an issue.
Okay.
And then on slide 8, so let's see, all generation. Okay, yeah. So we don't think all generation tracking, or in fact existing Regis, is in conflict with the unspecified approach or the zonal approach based on our understanding of it. We think that approach just means that optimization for GHG costs does not result in resource-specific attribution that would affect REX. But you could still have all generation certificate tracking, in which case that's sort of, again, outside the sort of purview of this group, unless the market adopts source-specific attribution outside of optimization, which could potentially affect REX, like resource-specific reporting on market transfers or something like that, if that's something that this group is discussing. And then regarding your table, finally, we at least are not proposing to fully integrate certificates into the market. And then we also think that attribution in the market probably can't be entirely independent from Regis or REX. Several state programs require either bundling or procurement or proof of delivery of the energy from clean or renewable resources to load in addition to the certificate. So the question is, how does the market serve those programs? I'm not entirely clear on option 2, but again, we've suggested generally sort of coordination with Regis or sharing market data with Regis about renewable generation that's been deemed delivered or attributed to certain zones or states, so that information can be incorporated into that database, which is again used also to attribute renewable generation to load. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Todd. Those are all really good comments. And thanks for sharing CRS's perspectives too. So I see one last hand up, which is Tony Braun, and then I will cut the conversation there and give Brian a chance to give us a little recap. So Tony, would you please go ahead? And we're still not hearing you. Might be a little delay again. Tony, it still sounds like you're on mute.
Tony, your line is unmuted. I'm wondering if you're double muted because we can't hear you.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, he might have trouble taking his hand down, so I'll go ahead. So thanks everybody for the perspectives on this. I don't think that we reached a formal conclusion here, but I do think that the group was tending towards 2 or 3, such that we wouldn't have to create a fully integrated system. And I think the most we heard there would be having a system that's sort of cognizant of potential reporting requirements, but that system, the market design should recognize the reporting requirements which are in place at the time of, which are expected to be in place at the time of implementation, but be designed that's in such a way that's flexible enough to accommodate future changes to greenhouse gas reporting systems. So with that, I think we can kind of at least, if not close this issue out, say that we'll take it up when it comes to, in the context of the specific approaches that were offered, and really focus on the pragmatic issue at hand, which is the existing requirements that we have to accommodate but thinking about it in such a way that we can be flexible to the extent possible. So thank you everybody for weighing in here, and I hope I didn't mischaracterize anybody's opinions here. But I'd like to give Brian a chance to weigh in and give us a little recap of the second half of today's conversation. And if Brian, if you wouldn't mind just kicking it back to me so I can give folks a preview of Thursday. So Brian, all yours.
Sure, thanks, Kevin. So today we got a presentation from CARB on the mandatory reporting and cap and trade. They did provide some links for more information, as well as provided, and I think we will post the contact information for you to get more information from those specific resources. There was a few discussion topics in the Q&A session. The first one regarding while it may be a challenge to discuss the variations on policies, we maybe have more success in discussing the various mechanics on the regulations and how those mechanics would or would not apply or could be amended to facilitate the objectives that we're discussing here. And on that regard, CARB seemed to be open to that general concept and that delineation. Similarly, on the discussion of linkage, while establishing a true full linkage may be a challenge, and maybe a more achievable goal is to focus on common elements among programs that could be leveraged in our EDAM greenhouse gas objectives. There are some general questions regarding.
Yeah. Would you mind just so we can keep our eye on the second half of the conversation? Would you mind just tackling that second half, please?
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Sure. On Kevin's recap of last week's proposal, he did present what we perceive as 4 options. We did get some discussion around those 4 options. The majority of the discussions, I see it as discussing the relative importance of including directly an accounting design in this EDAM initiative, or compared to the alternatives of integrating with or producing information that would be compatible with some external accounting and reporting options on the table. And let's see, there are some comments that supported both sides of that argument, and that there seemed to be some consensus that it is important for a market design to produce what would be used in a reporting or accounting system, and we to focus on that, and perhaps focusing on a full integrated solution may be a challenge to our EDAM working group schedule. Back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining. I thought it was a really good call, and thank you again to the California Resources Board for making themselves available and answering a lot of the questions that we had. As a reminder, you can reach out to them with any sort of direct questions you might have about their program. In terms of Thursday, we got about 10 entities who submitted comments or questions rather in response to the homework assignment. So what I'd like to do is sort of use Thursday's discussion to maybe not run through them one by one, but characterize sort of what the working group's belief of the open areas are, and try to potentially at least take a look at the scope item list that we had to see if we need to make any amendments to that scope. Because I think where we are now is not where we were when we built that scope item list, and that's fine. I think we've all learned a lot and heard the approaches that were offered, and that helped us crystallize, in our minds at least, what the open questions were. So I think this is all part of a good natural evolution of where the working group needs to go. Hopefully we can have some really good details fleshed out in the subsequent meetings, and but keep an eye out on Thursday for the discussion of the open questions. So thanks everybody for joining, and just a reminder, we're back on the twice a week schedule, so we'll see you all on Thursday at 1 p.m. So thank you very much.